craftsman because I feel that I can build anything I can think of.
On the shores of Lake Washington in Seattle, master woodworker Evert Sodergren starts his day. A fourth-generation Swedish cabinet maker, Evert started working in his father's cabinetry and furniture shop after school at the age of 15 in 1935.
Actually, what I wanted to be was a naval architect. And my mother wanted me to be an architect. And of course, my father said, no, he's going to be a shop assistant with me. And that was it.
But with World War II looming, Evert decided to take a job with Boeing, where he worked in the model shop. His job was considered essential to the war effort, and it was here that Evert learned to appreciate tight tolerances and precision metalwork. After the war, Evert did a 2-year stint in the Army Air Corps, and then returned to Seattle, where he went into business with his father. And while his father built beautiful period reproductions, Sodergren Furniture also did a lot of custom cabinetry and woodworking. Evert helped grow the business and eventually took over from his father in 1956.
My father was only interested in the traditional design, and I wasn't satisfied with that. I would like to make something that hasn't been made before.
There is very little separation between home and workshop at Evert's. Furniture fills many spaces, and evidence of Evert's woodworking skill is everywhere in his home. The circular staircase is an Evert creation that was a solution to a space problem. And a doorway leads directly to the shop.
Morning, Evert.
There are not very many people who are really masters who know what they're doing. Evert knows when he looks at a piece of veneer why it won't lay down because it had a feathery grain, or why the glue didn't set up because the shop was cold. He's got more woodworking sense in pick a finger, any finger, than a lot of us have had who've been working for a long time. It takes time.
You don't decide, I'm going to be a craftsman, and there it is. It takes a lot of work to be a craftsman. Well, as soon as you put finish on a piece of wood, it brings out so much, not only the grain, but the color and texture and the depth. When you don't use any stains, I believe in using all natural wood colors. If the customer wants something different, we'll select a wood that satisfies that request rather than mixing up a bunch of stain and making it into something that it isn't.
In furniture, there's a real need for hardware, and his production is just amazing. In many cases of chests and things like that, that's all you touch.
I just have always been very fond of working with brass. A lot of my furniture has brass in it. When it came to these tansus, well, I can make that hardware. And on the first ones I did. I made it all by hand. Then I thought, gee, that's a lot of work. That is way too much work. So I started to shop around. I went to machine shops, and they said, well, we can do it, but we need 1,000, order for 1,000 before we can talk price, you know. So I just ran up against a dead end and said, I'll do it myself. Have been ever since. It's a slick machine. Sometimes one idea leads to the need for another. In other words, you develop problems that you need to solve. It's a continuous process. In a shop, you're solving problems all the time. There's always so many different ways of doing some things. If you give the project to 10 people, they'd probably have 10 different approaches on it. But you learn that then by experience that from all those 10 methods are in the back of your mind, and you automatically pick out that one that you know is going to be the most successful. But we work it out on paper first, thoroughly, and make as many drawings as you need in order to be satisfied that that's a good solution. we're going to go down to Eden Saw. They specialize in exotic veneers and also solid stock. And I've been buying from them for a long time. So they have quite a good selection. And there's always a chance that they have something new, you know. It's unusual that it's 1/18th.
Yeah.
In the old days it was 1/27th. Yeah, that's nice. They're very consistent, aren't they? This must have come from a one log here.
Yeah.
He works in the most amazingly small, dense, compact. I don't know if he's the best woodworker in America, but I know he produces the best work per square foot of anybody in the world.
Part of the challenge working here is adapting to the constraints of the environment. It'd be nice to have a much bigger space, for sure. You know, there's a lot packed in here, but it's big enough, you know. It's big enough to get it done, what you have to do.
How's it going, Larry?
Good. This one's just about ready for the guy to come pick it up.
Good
Just
deal.
going over with fine tooth comb again like we normally do.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Okay.
That's great.
Pick it up aside.
How's it going? You know,
It's going great.
all right.
We've made our own hinges. I think partly that comes from Evert's holistic sense that he has and pride with being able to do everything in the shop here. Other woodworkers might spend several hours pouring through catalogs or going to hardware stores looking for a hinge that suits a certain need. Evert will say, let's just make this, you know, and we'll make one. I think it's that kind of attention to detail and wanting to have control over the whole process that is reflected in the final result. I think that's going to work.
Oh, that's wonderful. Boy, that's a surprise, isn't it? Beautiful grain.
One of his strengths then is marrying different materials together into a harmonious balance. A lot of woodworkers just stay with wood.
Since the late 1940s, Evert has made his living in wood. Whether custom cabinetry, or architectural details, or his own unique furniture designs, Evert has survived as a craftsman.
One of my favorite comments by Evert was the customer doesn't see all the details and all the work that you actually put into a piece. And so the trick to survive is learning to know when to stop.
If you'll take care of all those before the crowd comes, that'd be great.
Okay.
And are you going to be at the desk, Edith?
Sure, I'll give it a try.
Okay.
Every 5 years or so, Evert has a sale of his existing inventory of furniture to make room for more.
These are takeoffs on Japanese tansus. Are you familiar with those? Uh-huh. So those are all valuables chests on the shelf, and these are floor models. Having finished pieces, you can get too much inventory, which is where I am now, and have to figure out how to find a home for these pieces.
The decision to make designs that in the end are what you want is not financially the strongest direction to go, but artistically it's absolutely the only direction to go.
Evert is not a publicity hound, and he's not a self-promoter. To get into the national limelight, you really have to do some serious promoting.
In order to have sold across the country, Evert would have had to do production work. He would have had to have been able to have sample pieces, and somebody who could have gone to New York or to Boston or to Chicago and said, here, you'll really like these pieces. And the store would have said, oh yeah, they're really nice. I'll take a dozen of those, 2 dozen of these. Evert doesn't do that kind of work. There's no interest in it for him. He is an artisan and not a manufacturer.
This is called the frame and panel tansu, and it has solid stock everywhere except the top, which is veneered, and it has to be so that there's no shrinkage that will occur. And of course, the door panels are the same Bubinga burl, and the solid stock is, of course, Bubinga too. And I use the lifting handles, which the Japanese put a bamboo pole through here to, and then one person on each end, and that's the way they carry them around, which is a detail that I felt, although it may not be used very often, it's just a detail that I wanted to include in this particular case, which is not used in some of the other tansus that I make. Then I've designed this hardware to kind of do this job of the sliding door thing, and that's brass and ebony, and so the whole thing is brass and ebony and Bubinga.
Working in wood has always been at the heart of Northwest crafts from the earliest days that people settled here, and he stands as the epitome of a Northwest woodworker.
He seems to have a way with wood that he gives it energy, and his design, I think, helps in that energy that's produced by the way he treats wood. You really know he really likes wood to the way he treats it and the products that he achieves.
Back when Evert was starting, it wasn't a very well-respected tradition. It was really kind of a blue-collar thing, and Evert and some of the other well-known woodworkers in the country, like Sam Maloof and George Nakashima and Krenoff, they're considered 3 of the big figures, are pretty much contemporaries of Evert's in age, and these are people who were doing it when it wasn't cool like it is now.
He began to work at a time when America was just beginning to turn from heavier furniture to Scandinavian designs. And Evert went to Sweden to look at those designs, to see how they did things.
His work does have a lot of the purity of the Scandinavian design, but I think he's brought it into another level, much more artistic level.
Everything was simple, straight lines and a clean look to it. And Evert followed that look in his furniture, except because this was the Northwest, and because we are so familiar with Asian design, he lent an Asian look to furnishings that were at base Scandinavian. And in that it was different from furniture that was being produced anywhere else in this country, maybe anywhere else in the world.
Evert, as a craftsman, has traits that are really strong in the Northwest, and that is of people going their own direction, and of doing their own designs and not just copying other designs and that kind of thing.
There was very few cabinet or furniture makers working in the contemporary mode. Most of it was done in a traditional or semi-traditional. So he was one of the first to break away.
I don't think the designer should strive for a piece of art. I think they should strive for a piece of well-designed, well-made furniture, period.
For example, his chair is basically a work of art. It's a work of sculpture.
And the combination of the wood and the metal or glass or whatever that he's using sets him apart and makes the furniture really not a piece of furniture, but more a piece of art than a piece of furniture.
This is an African tribal stool. The story on this is that Morris Graves came in and had one under his arm like this, and he said, Evert, can you make me something like this?
This is extremely well designed. The proportions and the way this flares out and the connection here, it's all done in a very sculptural way. So this really becomes a piece of sculpture.
I went through a long era of wanting to sculpt things, and so why not sculpt a chair? And that's how that developed.
It's a very comfortable chair, and it gets your back just in the right. For a person with a bad back, it supports my back, which is very good.
And then I wanted an adjustable back, so that when it's sitting by itself, this back would seek its correct position to become part of the chair design. The other thing, the most important element in this structure, the fact that these had to be joined here, there's no strength in this joint. If you glued those four together and tried to make a chair, it would collapse. So I introduced this inner, what I call the bone, in here that is laminated between all the solid parts.
The spline forms a continuous member throughout the legs, the front rail, and the main rail going up to the back. As such, it's subject to a lot of stress. I mean, this chair wants to go in different directions. But this spline holds everything together, and it's, again, it's down to the minimal. We found that, a little less than 1/8 of an inch performs this. And we've never had one break against the spline. So rather than, as is traditional, do a joint here, the spline with the sandwich is the joint. That performs that function. So it's kind of a different way of doing something. And again, then instead of hiding that spline and trying to disguise it, it becomes a design element.
Then I wanted something that felt good. I think its function, of course, its main function is to sit in it and be comfortable.
Showing furniture as contemporary craft was a new idea in the 1950s. As a founding member of Northwest designer Craftsmen, Evert participated in the few exhibition opportunities that came along. In the 1960s, crafts received attention in commercial galleries, and by the late 1970s, Seattle had its own cooperative fine woodworking gallery.
When people came to Seattle, if they wanted to go to galleries, I would say 9 times out of 10, the Northwest Gallery of Fine Woodworking would be their first stop, because there they could see things that they had not seen before, that they could actually incorporate into their lives.
The Fine Woodworking Gallery became more national in scope, attracting national artists into the gallery, not only just the membership. Evert coming into the gallery and becoming a member was part of that influence. He gave the other owners the opportunity to look beyond just that one piece of furniture that they were making at one time all by themselves.
I would say there's not much doubt that Evert was, to quote a client of mine, a real feather in the cap for the gallery. He was certainly one of the most recognizable figures around here and most respected figures, and I think everybody was very... Evert's in the gallery now. I think there was kind of a nice boost of confidence almost that Evert was part of it.
He'd been building furniture for so many years, for so many people, and he was making a living selling his furniture, and a really good living. He was popular. He had well-established clientele. People came to him. He didn't really have to go out and market his things because he had a reputation already. And the woodworkers were open to learning more about that at that time.
His attitude was kind of like, why don't we share these people? I mean, sure, I'll share some clients with them, but they'll share clients with me. I mean, of course that's the way it works.
The more that they could share and help each other and teach each other, the better each one of them did their craft. I don't know, I used to call it was the sawdust that brought them together and bonded them together.
When I first joined the fine woodworking group, nobody was using veneers. And I was using veneers. Whether they frowned on me for using veneers, they didn't say. But the general opinion throughout my whole lifetime has been that people think veneers are inferior, a substitute, something that isn't as good as something made of solid wood. Well, veneers are solid wood, just thinner. And you can get effects and accomplish things with veneers that you cannot do with solid wood. This is what we call a knight's bench. It's from the old English times when the knights had them carved in elaborate ways to sit around the round table, I guess. This is a simplified version using lamination. These are happen to be cherry laminations. We pile up a series of thicknesses and put them in a form in a wide lamination, and we saw them narrow to what we want on the saw, and the same way with this base, which is another form that we put it in, and do the same thing there. When we glue the veneers all together with epoxy resin, and then clamp it in the form, and use a lot of pressure, a lot of clamps to bring it up. And then overnight, of course, it cures. It cures so that it doesn't have any spring back like steam bending always has spring back. And other glues that have water, any adhesive that has water in it will not work for this because it takes too long for it to cure. And when it cures, it changes its shape. Epoxy does not change its shape. That's why it was a boon to laminations. If they want to use solid and cannot stand the idea of using veneers, they ought to buy IKEA because that's all solid and it's cheap.
I think Evert's a good teacher. He's got a wealth of experience to draw on. And he's free with that.
I had him for a whole year of furniture design at the University of Washington. I was studying under Hope Foote. And the first part of the quarter we designed furniture, and then we went right into the workshop and built the pieces of furniture. And I'm happy to say I still have all 10 of my fingers.
The interiors class from Hope Foote was all afternoon, every afternoon. And then part of that was furniture design, where you would design a piece of furniture and then go to the shop and make it. And Evert was in charge of the shop and also very much in charge of converting your design to something that you could do that he thought he could teach you in a short time.
And he was a great instructor. I mean, it was a melting of design and also craftsmanship. He was an excellent craftsman.
A sign of a good craftsman is not one who never makes mistakes. A sign of a good craftsman is knowing what to do about him.
If my apprenticeship with Evert didn't turn out as it did, there's no chance I would be a furniture maker now. And I really like what I do, and that has a lot to do with Evert.
He instilled in, for me, a belief I could build anything.
The apprentice, when he first comes, just does whatever needs to be done to help out.
All the apprentices, God, he'd go through them because they were so intimidated by him.
Glue this and sand this or assemble this. And
I don't know how I figured it out so fast, but for this, gruff Swedish man who was very old world and would, if he caught someone sitting down, he'd just threaten to fire him. He said, if it was my father would write you that final paycheck right there. And but I saw through it early on, very early on, that he just had a heart of gold.
There's a lot of sanding.
And he believed that apprentice should have, sandpaper in his hand at least 80% of the time. And the other time he should be gluing veneer down, and that was it.
He learns by doing and by observing and through lectures.
One of the first things he told me was, have your glue pot right next to what you're going to glue, and don't be a Picasso. Just get the glue on the piece and clamp it.
Probably as much as techniques and methods that I've learned from Evert, it's been more, even more, it's just kind of a work style and kind of values about work.
You want to see Evert on a Saturday or Sunday, don't bother knocking on the front door. You walk around to the shop. That's where he'll be.
Yeah, he's got a work ethic that just won't stop.
He works every day, whether it's for 8 hours or 2 hours. He works every day because building furniture, thinking about furniture, reworking designs is what he is all about.
Evert had a ping pong table set up in his garage, and I thought I was a decent table tennis player, but for the first game and a half that we played, I couldn't touch his serve. I couldn't touch the ball. He had so much spin on it. It had just a wicked curve to it, and I couldn't touch it.
Evert was so skilled that it was extremely difficult to topple his prowess.
He's playing pickleball and ping pong, and 80 years old, going on about 16 if you ask me.
Evert's love of sports and competition goes way back. Though he doesn't swim, Evert raced sailboats, built some of the early water skis, and of course he built a few boats.
So you won't be gone more than 3 or 4 days?
Oh, I should be back by Thursday.
All right.
How's my speed?
There's a child in the man who still wants to keep a lightness in everything he does. I think that's why he's never become very oriented toward making a national name for himself. He leads a balanced life. He works, he plays, and that kind of lightness, I think, is visible in his furniture in some ineffable way.
This project is supported in part by an award from the National Endowment for the Arts.